One of our most important responsibilities as parents and grandparents is to prepare our kids for marriage. Join us for this important conversation today on Family Vision.
Hi, my name is Amy Rienow. Welcome to Family Vision with my parents, Dr. Rob and Amy Rienow, strengthening families through practical, encouraging, and real conversations.
Rob and Amy Rienow here with Visionary Family Ministries. We're so glad to be back together with you. Well, it's graduation season, and I have a gift idea for you. If you have a graduate who likes to fish, see, I love two things. I love fishing for men and fishing for fish. And I wrote a devotional that combines those two passions. Let there be fish. Become a fisherman of faith. The book walks through the Bible, giving examples of fishermen, fishing equipment, fish stories. There's great pictures, as well as a gospel message that comes from the Christian fish. You've seen that on the back of cars before, that little Christian fish thing. Yeah. And it explains, what's that all about? What does that mean? And it points people to Jesus. So if you have a graduate who likes to fish, I know they'll love it. Get it on Amazon.
And this is the last week to sign up for the Cedar Bay Family Camp in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, July 19th through the 25th. We really hope to see you there. There are a few spots left, so please join us in July. We'd love to see you there.
Yep, all the information on our website, visionaryfam.com. You will see the camp banner. We would love to have your whole family be with our whole family that week. Well, we're continuing our 10 Commandments series. Here on Family Vision, we're talking about the 7th commandment from Exodus chapter 20. Do not commit adultery. This is actually the third podcast on this one because there's a lot to talk about. If you missed the first two, go back and listen. We talked about the big picture of the commandment. Last week, we talked about practical ways to guard our marriages. This week, we're going to explore the idea of helping our kids prepare for marriage if that's God's calling for them.
Yeah, this is definitely the season of life that we have been in since about 2020 when our oldest got married. And then we've had two more get married since then. So we are in the thick of it in our own family of just helping our children prepare for this lifelong commitment. But we always find it interesting that when you take a poll of people later in life, I mean, this is very common, and you'd ask them what's the most important thing in their life, they will frequently say their family or their marriage. I mean, you hear that not only represented in polls, but I think you see that theme in so many movies, for example. You will see, the very successful businessman, the come back to discovering, what's the one we just watched recently? It was called Imagine That with Eddie Murphy. It's a really sweet movie, but similar theme. You see it over and over. The man who's lost in the world of business, and
Christmas at the Cranks.
Yes, and then has to come back to the importance of his family. But what's interesting is that when you look at how we raise our kids and how their education is, it's always very focused on career. Like it's focused on what you're going to do, what you're going to do, what you're going to do. And there's very little focus on how to prepare our young people for marriage. So that's kind of what we want to talk about in this session of how do we do that? How do we help our kids to live in such a way in our own homes and through their high school years that will help, best prepare them to be married one day. And one thing that we just started doing, in our own home, and I would find this to be amazingly effective. And this just goes in lots of different areas, but of discipline in the home. But even when our kids are dealing with anger, for example, or having a problem with their siblings, they're lashing out, or let's say they're doing the silent treatment, they're being rude, I would often say to them, well, are you going to treat your future spouse this way? You know what I mean? And they look at me kind of, funny. Or do you want to I would even just, or your future boyfriend, your future girlfriend. I'm like, because I would just remind them that who they are at home is who they really are. So I would say, start practicing now for the person you want to be in that future home. And it's amazing how even little kids can understand that, because I said, this you that's showing up here, this you that's being incredibly rude to me or incredibly rude to your sibling, I hate to break it to you, but that rude version of you is going to show up in the future marriage. So we're going to do what we can now to help prepare you for the best marriage that you could possibly have, if that's what God has for you.
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of parents on the subject of how do I help my kids prepare for marriage is they immediately start thinking about dating, right? They start thinking about courting, those first maybe romantic interests that our kids have. And first of all, a little history. Honey, you and I grew up in a generation where our parents, generally speaking, had nothing to do with, really, our love life, who we liked, what we were doing with who we liked, or who we were hanging out with. So that's something that our generation of teens did on our own, and it frequently ended badly. A lot of things happened.
Well, and if you were a Christian, if you were a Christian kid, for example, you would go to your youth pastor or maybe a youth group small leader, but it was not as normal. I wouldn't necessarily talk to my mom. I mean, I talked to my mom a little bit about the boys I liked, or, there was some conversation about that. She was probably compared to other moms, I think she was probably more involved than a lot of other moms would have been. And I had a great open relationship with her. But in general, if you weren't a part of a church, you were definitely not talking to your parents. And then people who might have been in those youth groups or Christian kids were inclined to probably talk to their youth pastor. That's where they got any information about dating or help in that area.
Yeah. So you have some Christian families today who responded to that, and they say, well, we don't do dating, we do courting. And they say, okay, great, what is that? Are we just swapping out one term for another? So for us, we think there's two basic ways to do this. One is the way we grew up, which is kids do it all themselves. They are on their own. They are getting into relationships and out of relationships, engaging sexually or not on their own. That's the way the world does it. The way we think families ought to do it, the way we think the biblical model is simply that parents and teens work together, that we talk together, we pray together, we walk this very important, difficult path together because, Lord willing, we have the same goal. One of the most powerful questions that you can start to have with your teenager and even your pre-teenager is, do you, son, daughter, want to have an amazing Christian lifelong marriage? Would you like that someday? And almost every teenage boy or girl would say, yeah, great. Well, that's exactly what I want for you. So in other words, you and your child have the identical goal, the identical destination. So it would only make sense then, well, let's work together on that goal if you and I want you to be in the exact same place. One of the questions you can even ask your child, you can ask this to an elementary school student, a junior higher, a high schooler, just this question of, would you like to have a happy marriage someday? Would you like to be happily married? Most kids are going to say yes. And you're able to then respond to that by saying, well, you know what? That's what I want for you too. In fact, I don't want you just to have a happy marriage. I want you to have an amazing, Christ-centered, lifelong marriage. That's my hope for you. So let's walk this path together.
And then that helps open the door to the conversation of what are we doing here now to help us get towards that goal? Because I do think that many kids may not have the answer at that point, but a good majority will usually respond yes, that they would like that. They're very interested in having a boyfriend, a girlfriend, and considering being married someday. But the Bible gives us some direction on this, and I think we often overlook it. First of all, in the Song of Solomon, there's this phrase over and over. It says, don't awaken love before it's time. And that is kind of implying that, we need to wait for the appropriate time to even start thinking about love and marriage, and even, I always go back to history, but that's also common in history too, that there was, like a phase or a season where, back in, the days of Jane Austen, a girl would be kept, in her home and not supposed to go out in the social world or the next setting until she was ready for, finding a marriage partner, or to date. There was a sense of social norms around that. So I'm going to go back to S.M. Davis here. We've just learned a lot from him. And I love the way he unpacks this verse in Mark 10:19. It says, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, and this do not defraud. And then honor your father and mother. And I'd never really, until I heard him talk about this, really paid attention to these words, do not defraud. And he connects this to what is often happening with young people and dating, meaning that when you defraud someone, you say that you're going to do something for them, you say you're going to be there for them, and it's kind of like you're acting on that promise, but you defraud them when you pull that away, when it's not really true. And what is often happening in the dating world that we were talking about, especially when we grow up, you have a lot of kids saying, I love you, getting involved sexually with someone, and then things fall apart. And really, I love you did not mean, certainly what the Bible says I love you to mean, but that's a defrauding. It's a promise of something and then pulling it back. And he makes the point that what is happening so often in this dating culture is actually teaching people more to break up than to stay together, because they are making these promises or these commitments or having these feelings towards one another. And as soon as things go awry or it gets hard, the relationship ends and they start with someone else. And you can see how this pattern that really kicked into high gear in our culture during, of course, the love revolution of the late 1960s and 70s, where that became common. And lo and behold, what did we see in culture was lots of divorce, because we were engaging in this living really by our feelings and our words not really meaning what they were supposed to mean. A commitment wasn't a commitment. Saying I love you really didn't mean saying that forever, and that's a form of defrauding. So it often, dating in the current way it happens with a lot of young people, just teaches people to break up and to end relationships when things get tough, which is why we've really encouraged our kids, especially in high school years, to not have serious relationships in the high school years. There's a couple practical reasons for that as well. And one is just simply that when you enter into a dating relationship, it takes a lot of time. It pulls you away from other friendships. High school years, there's a lot of things that you're dealing with, whether it's sports, academics, a lot of things going on in your life. And often that stress of having a boyfriend or girlfriend is pulling you away from things that you often will regret being pulled away from. So that's been just in our house. We're not saying everybody needs to have that rule, but we've tried to say, don't have serious relationships in high school. It's you go to dances with people, enjoy spending time in groups, but the serious relationship can end up having a lot of pressure. And when you're so far away from making a lifelong commitment of marriage.
Yeah, that's just been our practical attempt at applying the scriptural principle of not awakening love before its time. And we were just having this conversation with our daughter the other night. She's 17. That young people, teenagers, are in a difficult situation today. The hypersexualized culture that they're in. But it wasn't that long ago that people got married when they were 17 or 18. Right? Puberty kicks in. They want to, find a special someone, and lo and behold, they're able to get married. Well, now marriage is 22, 25, 30. So there's this huge gap between when they're getting passionate and interested in relationships, but marriage is, for most people, going
later.
To be delayed. So what happens is if you get a relationship, like a committed boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, and especially if anything sexual is added into that accelerates things so fast. And now, you're 17, you're in a committed boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. There's no room for growth. You have to stop and plateau and wait 5 years until you can get married for the next stage of your relationship. And unfortunately, what happens then, things flame out or they get sexually out of control. It just becomes very difficult. So to your point, really encouraging the patience and the slowness, developing friendships, waiting for those college age years, the 18 to 22, before we want to give our kids the green light to begin entering into more serious, committed boyfriend-girlfriend relationships.
But I think the big difference compared to the way we grew up and approached this situation, again, most of our cues came from the TV shows and the movies that we were watching. That's where people often get, whether it's social media, it's like the rom-coms I talked about. This is where, sadly, that's the guideline for how we should enter into relationships or what we should expect. And I think the most important principle here is just having open, heart-connected relationships with your kids so that you can be talking about these things so your kids don't feel like they're hiding this part of their life from you, that you have a relationship where you can talk about it, because that's unusual. And that's what we want to be doing in our homes, is having those open relationships and it not expecting perfection in this area, not expecting that your kids aren't going to feel embarrassed if, or They may make mistakes. It's not that we're looking for this perfect road to marriage. We're just looking to help one another and talk about it with each other. But the people, you have to tell your teenager, your parents are the people who know you best. And that is why you do want to talk to them about this important issue in your life.
And part of these conversations, not just about dating, but also the sexual conversations, in our generation, sweetheart, if we had great parents, we got a thing called the talk. That was one of them. It was 5 minutes long. It was fairly mechanical, birds and bees, et cetera. But our kids don't need the talk. They need talks. Matter of fact, Barrett Johnson's got a great book on that called The Talks. I remember a story. I had a young man at our church, this was years ago, come to me, and he was struggling, about 13 years old. He was struggling with pornography. Came to reach out and confess and wanted help with that, and I was so thankful, right? Tremendous courage from this young man to do this. So we talked and we prayed, and I asked him if he had asked his father, have you told your dad about this? He's like, no, I haven't. I'm like, well, I knew his dad and really encouraged him. I said, hey, your next step is to tell your dad. So he got up the courage, told his dad, and Dad did great. They had a really good conversation. Dad was not shaming. He was supportive. It went as well as could be expected. The boy told me, yeah, I talked to my dad. It went good. I said, great. A couple years later, boy comes back to me. He's got another thing he wants to talk about, different subject. We talk it through, and I say, well, you probably know what I'm going to tell you. Have you told your dad? And he said, no, I haven't told my dad. I'm like, well, why don't you tell your dad? And he's like, I'm not talking to him. And I'm like, well, I was totally taken back because I said, well, wait a minute. Last time we did this, you talked to your dad, you said it went great. He said, yeah, we had one conversation. And my dad never came back around to check in with me about how I was doing with the porn and the phone and the internet and all that kind of stuff. So this boy learned from his dad, one great conversation is not enough. It's talks. We've got to be continually pushing and pressing into the awkwardness of these conversations and building, honey, as you said, the continued heart connection.
And that's always convicting to me, is that I don't think I always do great with talks. And I have found that I have to ask very intentional, specific questions and not just, how is it going? When if my kids are liking somebody or, that kind of thing, I have to be more specific. I have to be more intentional with my questions because it's hard for these kids to initiate talking about things. It's opposite of everything in their gut and everything that culture says should be hide from your parents. Like, that's the norm, is to hide these things from your parents. So we have to be very specific. And one of the ways we can do that is just, there's a lot of power in opening up and sharing your story with your teen, the things that you did right, the things that you did wrong, the things that you wish you knew when you were their age. That is super, super helpful. And it just helps kids to realize that you were a teenager at one point. You had the same feelings. You were struggling. And so it keeps them understanding that, again, you're not expecting them to get through these things without any mistakes, and having open conversations. And it also, helps me with open conversations even with my adult children after marriage because, this is not just a teenage thing. You're going to learn when you get married, we're not just talking about sex. I'm just talking about like relational things, like when you can be honest and say, yeah, we had a hard time when we were first married because of da-da-da-da-da. Those are good things for your kids to hear and understand, your own stories, your own testimonies.
Yeah, and a few minutes ago you said there's no smooth path to this. There's no perfect path that kids take or that families take. And in our ministry, honey, we get a lot of crisis phone calls, crisis news, whether it's a daughter who's pregnant or discovery of, again, sexual behavior or an abuse situation or all sorts of things that can come up. And one of the ways that part of what we want to do in our ministry is we would just love for there to be fewer crisis calls that come in. And every family has experienced them. We've been the ones making those calls as we've had crises in our own family. But one of the best things that Christian families can do is connect with other Christian families, that you are not alone, that you have real Christian friendships, families that are going through the same things on the same journey, supporting each other and praying for each other. And that's what our visionary family community is all about. We are putting together a global network of like-minded Christian families who just want to follow Jesus. They want to support each other. They want to pray for each other. If your family is feeling just somehow alone, like you feel like you're on an island, that you don't have people that you can talk with or pray with or connect with, we'd love to invite you to consider becoming a Visionary Family, joining this Visionary Family group. You can learn all about it. Go to our website, visionaryfam.com. Click the Join the Community button. It'll explain who these people are and what this group is all about. We'd love the chance to build a closer relationship with you. And we'd love to see you in person. We could see you in June in Iowa at the Homeschool Iowa Conference in Des Moines. We could see you in July. 2 family camps in Michigan, Cedar Bay and Gull Lake. We could see you in August, family weekend just outside Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Lots of opportunities this summer for us to get connected. Learn all about those Visionary Family events at visionaryfam.com. If you're not already a subscriber or a follower to the podcast, take 1 second and click that follow or subscribe button. And one of the ways you could reach more families, help us reach more families, is take a minute and leave a review, whatever platform you're listening to this on. Leave a review of Family Vision. When you do that, it tells the algorithm to share this content and this Bible teaching with more families around the world so we can partner together. And as always, if you've got prayer requests, something we talked about today, you're dealing with it and you want prayer, email us, podcast@visionaryfam.com. And we look forward to our next time together with you on Family Vision.